Okay, so looking at the White Devil then, coming to the end of Act 1, there's quite an important speech from Flamineo. Here he talks about the Duchess coming to court. He's just reflects on the fact that Isabella is about to come to Rome, and as he says, I like not that. He's quite unhappy, okay, but he's resigned to the fact that we are engaged to mischief, and must on as rivers to find out the ocean, flow with crook bendings beneath forced banks. So he's just basically talking about if someone wants to be corrupt, like the ocean, it's unstoppable, but as well as being unstoppable, for it to find its way from the source to the ocean, it doesn't always take the quickest path. So he's kind of recognising that if he really wants to carry out the plan, he's going to have to do a bit of twisting and turning. And here we've finished with his couplet at the end. So who knows policy in her true aspect shall find her ways winding and indirect. So a good politician, in other words, knows how to be a little bit indirect and be a little bit manipulative. We start off Act 2 with the setting. We've got some very big players in Act 2 here. Big change here to the courts. We have Francisco, who is the Francisco de' Medici, the Duke of Florence, very, very rich. And next to him, Cardinal Monticelso. And obviously he's Webster's representative of the church in this play. As well as that, we have Marcello, just to make it a little bit more interesting. He is a sibling of Vittorio and Flamineo. He's a secretary, which is why he's in this scene. And Giovanni, who is Bracciano and Isabella's son. Obviously, he stands to inherit the dukedom, so quite powerful, regardless of his age. I think he's about 9 years old at this point. Jacques de Moor doesn't make an appearance, so why he's here I don't know, and we need to think about why Webster has put him in the stage directions. Obviously a Moor would be someone of North African descent, as is Zanche. Maybe there's something here about status, just something to consider. The scene is basically started off with Francisco and Monticelso questioning Isabella about has she seen Bracciano. He compares Bracciano to a polecat, saying that if he had something as beautiful as Isabella, he would do everything to destroy any person that was trying to take what was his. It's just quite an interesting comparison here. Another piece of natural imagery. There's a little interruption here from Giovanni where he says, "You promised me a horse and armour." These kind of images of being a soldier. It's just quite interesting that Francisco's talking about burning people down, and the little child that's on the stage suddenly is prompted to say, "Oh, well, you promised me a horse and armour." It's also quite realistic. So what Webster's doing here is giving us a more almost kind of soap opera-ish view of what's going on in the court. Francisco asks for Marcello to go and get the armour fitted, at which point Marcello tells him that Bracciano's come. And what's really interesting here is, again, Francisco sends Isabella away and says, "You must not yet be seen." So it's just this kind of motif of hiding again in the scene. You might want to have a think about here how brothers feel like they need to step in and deal with sisters, like they own them, which is really interesting. Maybe a little bit Freudian. I don't know. Something for you to think about. Isabella goes to hide, but before she does, she asks Francisco and Monticelso to make sure that they're not too harsh, because she thinks it might maybe make them argue more, set us at louder variance. And she sort of claims some blame for what's happened. All my wrongs are freely pardoned. So, if I've been pardoned for what I've done, I think we should pardon Bracciano. She then talks about a spell at the time which was believed to be true. That if you grinded up a unicorn's horn and made a circle with the dust, you could put a spider inside it, and the spider wouldn't be able to get outside of the unicorn's horn. And she kind of uses that to say that actually I can charm him and I can stop him from straying. An infected strain is what she says, which is quite ironic due to Camillo's behaviour. Francisco says, well, I hope you're right, and tells her to be gone. And Isabella goes. What's really interesting is now Francisco says, void the chamber. This is a stage direction, so it clearly tells the director what needs to happen. It's also an imperative, so just demonstrative of his power, really. You might want to have a think about what else that could mean, what else the word chamber could mean at this point. Francisco says, welcome, take a seat, but he decides he's too emotional to talk, so he asks Montechelso. And he says, I'll second you. I'll speak in a second. Montechelso then also preempts what he's going to say and says, forego all passion which may be raised. So if I'm a bit passionate in what I'm about to say, just ignore what I'm about to say. A kind of preemptive apology. So it's all very courteous at this point. Bracciano's response is very interesting. He says, as silent as the church. Silent as in the church, as in when we go to church we don't speak. And I just wonder what you think Webster might be saying about people that go to church, in that you can't question things. Maybe a comment on religion, or maybe just playing to Montechelso's beliefs. Obviously he's a Catholic, maybe Bracciano just wants to have him on side. And then you may proceed, so kind of gives the go ahead for them to carry on. At which point Montechelso launches into, you've got noble friends. You seem to have entered the world with a free scepter. So you're a fantastic swordsman. You're good at fighting. You have brilliant gifts of learning. You're very educated, and you're in your prime age. And he can't understand why Bracciano would, as he put it, neglect his awful throne for the soft down of an insatiate bed. So he can't understand why he's having this affair. And he goes on to give this image of a drunkard who drinks lots, but then at some point must sober up, and kind of tries to talk Bracciano out of the affair. He also says, when you awake from this lascivious dream, repentance then will follow like the sting placed in an adder's tail, so you need to finish the affair soon or you will get stung. He then goes on to say, wretched are princes when fortune blasted but a petty flower on their unwieldy crows. It's this idea that perhaps princes can have their fortune taken away by women, maybe. And all princely titles perish with their names, so if you're not careful you'll lose everything. Bracciano stops him and then asks Francisco if he wants to speak, but there's a very interesting point here to do with context. He says, do not like young hawks fetch a course about, your game flies fair and for you. And this idea of when you're training a hawk doesn't fly from one person to another. It flies around quite a lot. It's very difficult to follow. And just really pleading with Francisco to just cut to the chase. Just an interesting contextual point, because obviously hawks hunt for prey, and obviously there's quite a lot of sexual imagery in this play, which might be about hunting. Francisco says, well, whilst we're talking about birds, your own hawking phrase, I'll use that metaphor too. And then talks about this idea of eagles that are soaring high, but birds that are on dunghills can basically bring them down. And then asks, Vittoria, potentially, is he talking about Vittoria? Bracciano agrees. Francisco says, you take your shirt off when you finish playing tennis. And Bracciano says, of course I do, happily. Francisco goes on to talk about the fact that she's poor. Her husband is a lord, but he's a poor lord, so although he's higher status, he doesn't have money, and the clothes she wears are not great. And Bracciano says, well, she goes to confession, she's a good girl, maybe you just want to cut to the chase, what are you trying to say about her? It makes no odds to me that she's poor. And Francisco finishes off with, she is your strumpet, which is where we finished the accusations. This actually does go on, this scene, so it starts to develop now, but this is the kind of first accusation, and I think there's quite a few things we need to think about when we're considering the fact that the people making the accusations are not in a sense offering any punishment for anything that's happened. They're suggesting that it just needs to stop, and given that one of them is a Catholic and one of them is Isabella's brother, this is quite surprising. And obviously we've got lots of things we can think about there with regards to Webster's ideas about deception and about what was suitable in terms of sexual relationships between characters, and of course our favourite word at the moment, misogyny. So I'll leave you for there. Thanks very much.